Good morning, everyone, and welcome to IGTV. And with us this morning, William H. Murray with Stop the Online Piracy Act. I'm putting a question mark on that. So, Bill, go ahead. Take it away.
Yeah, the question is whether we want to stop online privacy or whether we want to stop this act.
Yeah, I hear you.
SOPA, H.R. 3261, the Stop Online Piracy Act, is a long and complicated act. While I'm not a lawyer, I flatter myself that I am literate. However, I do not pretend to fully appreciate this law. A cursory reading suggests that while it pretends to be aimed at foreign, DMCA, infringing internet sites, it burdens and punishes U.S. enterprises directly. Since most of the sales of the foreign sites are to parties outside the U.S., they are not likely to be punished by it very much. Some of you have probably seen the television ad that urges support of this law. It suggests that it is about resisting international piracy. It even suggests that online piracy is the moral equivalent of piracy on the high seas. One is led to conclude that this is a national, or at least a cyber, security issue, justifying a dramatic increase in the police powers of the state. If you're an internet service provider, an internet search engine provider, a payment network service, or an internet advertising service, the law requires you to identify agents of your own to accept legal orders on your behalf and to provide both controls and operators to filter access or revenue to foreign infringing sites. As users of all of these services, American citizens will be forced to bear the cost. If you use a foreign site, so censured, for any purpose, you may be unable to access it. Of course, this law is sponsored, written, and supported by the publishing industry, the RIAA and the MPAA, Sony, Nintendo, and all the usual suspects. It is a last-ditch effort, a futile attempt to shore up their broken business model. The New Testament admonishes us that by their fruits you shall know them. Throughout history, every time there was an advance in technology that reduced the cost of copying, the publishers have used it to reduce their cost while maintaining their prices. When the end users of their content have used the same technology to force a change in prices, the publishers have cried foul. They have screamed like stuck pigs, which is, I suggest, an apt analogy. Of course, that's happened many times throughout history and multiple times in the last century. It happened with movable type, the linotype, and the photo offset press. It happened with magnetic tape recording. It happened with plain paper, dry process paper, photocopiers and scanners. It happened with the general purpose digital computer. Let's not forget VHS and MP3 players. The publishers have tried to outlaw most uses of all of these. Each time, the publishers have exploited the technology, but tried to use the law to resist the use by others. Every time their strategy has failed. Every time the price of their product has fallen to the point where it approximates the marginal cost of using the technology to exploit them. That's why one no longer pays $20 for an album, but 99 cents for the tracks that one wants. The irony is that the value of their rights increases because their sales increase and the illegal copying decreases. Said another way, piracy is a service and pricing problem. For example, I stopped looking for free downloads the day I got iTunes. I use BitTorrent and FrostWire because they are fast, as much as 30 times faster than not using them, not to access illegal content. Quite candidly, I think that it is a tragedy that collaborative networking has been so tainted by abuse and misuse that we do not use it for legitimate purposes. To the extent that this law and these controls are used to enforce court orders and injunctions, they would be limited in their potential for abuse. However, the law empowers the Department of Justice, the Attorney General, to use them as part of his police powers. Of course, it is appropriate that this expansion of power is really to the publishers, not to the police, to the publishers under the DMCA. After all, they wrote the law, they've paid for it, and they are entitled to use it. As citizens, we should be very suspicious when the interest of the money coincides with those of the politicians, the control freak politicians, those who believe that legislation can ensure that hammers hit only nails. Is it reasonable to believe that this increase in power will not be abused by those who have already abused the power that they have? Not only have the publishers used their power to punish arbitrarily and capriciously, but they have used their power to take down pages that they have no rights over, but whose content offends them. Noting that they have abused their power to take down pages, do we really want to empower them to take down entire domains? Note that the role of domain registrars is merely to create the bind between a name and an address, a role similar to that of the post office or the publisher of the phone directory. This law is the equivalent of a law that told the post office they cannot accept mail that contains DMCA contraband. The law transfers the burden of proof from the state to the citizen. Penalize first, decide, if at all, later. The law provides no defenses from and remedies for such abuse by either the state or the copyright holder. According to the MPAA and the RIAA, there is no such right as fair use, merely a defense of fair use. To the extent that the cost and burdens of this law were to be borne by the publishers and their customers, it might be defensible. However, the law places the cost and burden on the providers of totally unrelated services and their customers. Like the USA Patriot Act, this law, the intended purpose of this law, are likely to be dwarfed by the unintended consequences. Law is a blunt instrument, one that we should resort to only when all else fails. Moreover, this specific law is particularly blunt. Without due process, it permits entire sites to be taken down because of any infringing use, even ones that the providers of the site are not aware of. The House Committee with jurisdiction has published a list of tens of industry supporters of the bill. You can go out and find it on thomas.gov. While roughly half are publishers, there are some that would be subjects of the law. Of course, there's also a great deal of popular opposition. I went to YouTube to find the ad promoting the bill, but found only videos opposing it. While the race is not always to the swift, and the legislation is not always to the RIAA and the MPAA, that is how the smart money bets. As the author of the InfraGard editorial, I have tried to be measured in my response to this proposed law. I have tried not to view with alarm. That said, I am much less sanguine about this law now than when I began my research on it. If you think that I have failed in my attempt to be measured, I invite you to visit YouTube, where the proposal is covered with vitriol. I particularly commend to you the speech by Cory Doctorow at the Chaos Computer Conference. If you think I don't like this law, wait till you hear Cory. As a citizen, I find this law obnoxious and its sponsors both greedy and corrupting. As an information security professional, I expect some, not to say much, of its burden to fall on us. That's why its sponsors call it a security issue. But of course, that is why we are called professionals and are paid the big bucks.
Excellent, Bill. Just an excellent digest of that. And you hooked me on one thing that you brought up during the broadcast, and that was something that I've known for a great number of years, and this is about the law and being very, very careful about what laws you actually legislate, because they are blunt instruments. They're not these finely tuned things which can kind of bend and weave with society and its needs. It's very flat and it's very uneven sometimes.
Yeah, they're not scalpels.
No, they definitely are not scalpels, and I don't know when people will actually wake up to that fact. In a number of different areas, but this is clearly one of them.
The other problem, Joe, is that there is nothing in this world so difficult to remedy as bad law. Once you put a law into place, it develops its own constituency. And that constituency, therefore, becomes an injured party anytime you try to change the law. So we really ought to resort to law late, and we ought to be very, very careful. We should not put into place these broad, sweeping powers that are going to have more unintended consequences than intended ones.
Well, that's the problem with a lot of the legal system. There are some good hearts and minds that get behind a lot of this stuff because they think they're doing the right thing. But it's the unintended consequences later on that they learn about, which may handicap, even law enforcement from doing its job properly. So, in a lot of different areas, I certainly understand. We've got Dave on the line. He asked if you could tell us about the legal use of BitTorrent. He thought it was just a pirate's paradise.
Well, we call BitTorrent peer-to-peer file sharing. Actually, what it is collaborative networking, in which we use all of the participants in the sharing of an object as both clients and servers. I once went to download an image of a Unix operating system. It started out really, really fast, and then it got slower and slower and slower, and finally it was suggesting to me that it would complete in another 32 hours.
Wow.
At that point, I downloaded BitTorrent. Now, this is a perfectly legitimate copy that I was going to make. I was not infringing anything. Using BitTorrent, the same download took me just about an hour. And that's because all of the people who were downloading it were acting both as clients and servers. And instead of downloading it serially, I was downloading a segment here and a segment there and a segment in a different place. The servers are the limiting factor on downloading a file. And so if I can involve multiple servers, I can download the file in far less time than if I don't do it otherwise. So this kind of collaborative networking is perfectly legitimate. It's very powerful. We really ought to be using it, but it has become so tainted by its use to download pirated stuff, or at least that's what the claim is from the RIAA and the MPAA, that's all it's used for. We don't use it where it's perfectly appropriate and very powerful and fast.
So